Do you understand me now?
Did you know The Voice Australia, once called its greatest soul diva, spent her final years battling not only illness, but a shadowy web of scandals she could never escape? Renée Geyer had a voice that could break hearts, soothe souls, and light up a nation. Yet behind that mesmerizing, husky tone lay a troubled journey riddled with controversy, conflict, and private tragedies. Accusations of violence, public meltdowns, arrests, and substance abuse whispered beneath her luminous fame, painting a complicated portrait of a woman at war with herself and the world around her. While her hit songs dominated radio waves, few realized that the soulful diva known for heading in the right direction was actually spiraling downward behind closed doors. Haunted by personal demons, Renée's powerful presence masked deep-seated turmoil, until everything unraveled spectacularly in full public view. But what drove Australia's beloved diva toward this path of self-destruction? Was it the relentless pressure of stardom, or something darker, more hidden from view? In this video, we'll uncover the untold story behind Renée Geyer's glittering yet troubled career. From her battle with a devastating illness she kept hidden, to shocking revelations that forced fans and critics alike to rethink everything they knew about her. It's the heartbreaking truth behind the soulful legend, whose greatest fight wasn't against critics or rivals, but against herself. In the vibrant music scene of Australia in the 1970s and 80s, few artists commanded attention quite like Renée Geyer. With her gritty, soulful voice and rebellious persona, she carved out a distinctive place among Australian music royalty. Born in Melbourne in 1953, Renée quickly distinguished herself from other singers through her raw talent and a stage presence as captivating as it was enigmatic. By the time she was 21, her hit, Heading in the Right Direction, propelled her into national acclaim, cementing her status as Australia's preeminent queen of soul. Renée wasn't simply a voice, she was a force of nature. Throughout the 70s, Renée's star soared. Her albums regularly topped Australian charts, and she soon became one of the rare Australian talents to gain recognition overseas. Collaborations with global legends like Joe Cocker and Chaka Khan expanded her appeal internationally. Yet, amid this ascent, cracks began to show. Beneath the surface of success, Renée harbored a fiery temper and an unquenchable thirst for rebellion. Rumors swirled around her tempestuous personality, fierce confrontations, and explosive public incidents, rumors that grew increasingly difficult to ignore. The whispers turned louder when headlines surfaced detailing altercations involving alcohol, violent confrontations backstage, and public meltdowns. The image of a glamorous diva began to clash with stories of a woman battling deeper personal turmoil. Renée herself remained defiant, fiercely independent, and openly dismissive of public opinion, fueling further speculation about what truly drove her controversial behavior. As the years passed, Renée's reputation evolved into something complex and polarizing. Despite ongoing critical acclaim and an unwavering fan base, her public persona was increasingly overshadowed by scandal and accusations. Some confirmed, others vehemently denied. The tabloids painted a picture of a star spiraling out of control, trapped in a destructive cycle that threatened to derail her career entirely. But what the public never fully grasped was the internal war Renée had been quietly waging, a struggle that went beyond her public controversies. In secret, Renée had been diagnosed with breast cancer, a devastating reality she fiercely concealed. Refusing pity and determined to maintain her powerful image, she continued to perform while enduring exhausting medical treatments. The diva whose voice had brought joy to millions now grappled privately with pain and vulnerability. Yet, even illness couldn't halt the storms of controversy that continued to shadow her every move, from explosive altercations with authorities to candid admissions about drug use. In this tangled narrative of glory, rebellion, illness, and scandal, the question remains: how did a woman blessed with unmatched talent find herself entangled in a spiral of conflict and controversy? Was Renée Geyer's turbulent life simply a product of fame's relentless pressures, or were deeper, darker forces at play? The truth lies somewhere between her public facade and her private pain, a truth we are about to reveal. Renée Geyer's rise to fame was anything but ordinary. Born to Hungarian and Slovakian Jewish immigrants, she grew up in a household steeped in resilience and survival. Music, however, wasn't her first calling. It was rebellion. Expelled from school at 16, she stumbled into a local band as a backing vocalist, and from there, everything changed. Her raw, emotive delivery stunned those around her. Within a few short years, she had gone from obscurity to being hailed as the white woman who could sing soul like no other in the Southern Hemisphere. In 1973, she released her debut album, self-titled and confident. But it was in 1975, with the release of Ready to Deal and the breakthrough hit Heading in the Right Direction, that Renée transcended local fame. Her voice, brimming with anguish and passion, seemed too big for Australia. She wasn't just a singer, she was a feeling, a wave that knocked listeners off their feet. Crowds adored her, critics praised her, the industry tried to shape her, but Renée wouldn't be molded. Her refusal to conform became both her badge of honor and her curse. While other female artists polished their image for mainstream appeal, Renée doubled down on being unapologetically herself. Fiery, foul-mouthed, politically incorrect, and proudly defiant. She rejected the image of the female role model the media sought to place upon her. Instead, she drank hard, swore harder, and refused to be silenced. As her fame grew, so did her legend, and so did the rumors. By the early 1980s, Renée was recording in Los Angeles, rubbing shoulders with global icons. She sang backup for Sting on his Soul Cages tour. She worked with Stevie Wonder's engineer. Her voice was everywhere, yet her name was still a whisper in the American market. She would later describe her time in the US as both thrilling and deeply alienating. The fame she tasted abroad came with an undertow of self-doubt and isolation. She didn't belong to them, and slowly she began to feel she didn't belong anywhere. Back in Australia, the narrative began to change. While her voice remained impeccable, her personal behavior began to overshadow her art. Reports of erratic stage performances, missed rehearsals, and backstage tantrums started to surface. Renée laughed off the gossip, but the stories wouldn't stop. Her run-ins with the media became legendary, fueled by a long-standing hatred of journalists whom she saw as vultures. Then came the tipping point. In the 1990s, during what should have been a mature renaissance for her career, Renée was charged after a violent incident involving a hotel receptionist. The story made front pages. The diva had struck again, this time not on stage, but in public disgrace. Though the legal outcome was mild, the damage to her reputation was deep. Sponsors pulled back. Radio airplay cooled. Some fans began to distance themselves. But Renée didn't care. Or at least, she said she didn't. She continued to perform, defiantly alive, refusing to fade out quietly. Albums kept coming, raw, soulful, fearless. She released a searing autobiography in 2000 titled Confessions of a Difficult Woman, embracing the very label others used to criticize her. In its pages, she laid bare her pain, her pride, her rage, and something else, a fatigue, a weariness that hinted at deeper wounds. What few knew was that Renée had already begun her battle with serious illness. Long before the public announcement, she had been diagnosed with breast cancer and was quietly undergoing treatment while still touring. She masked her struggle behind sunglasses and sass, never letting the public see her falter. Her voice remained strong, but her body was starting to betray her. The final blow came years later when she developed complications during hip surgery. It was meant to be routine. Instead, it marked the beginning of her final decline. The press called it tragic. Some called it karma. But those closest to Renée knew. She had been fighting much longer than anyone realized, against the music industry, the media, her own demons, and perhaps most painfully, against herself. For years, the public image of Renée Geyer oscillated between reverence and ridicule. To many, she was the iconic soul queen of Australia, a trailblazer who gave voice to raw emotion and female power. But to others, she was a walking contradiction, difficult, volatile, unpredictable. Yet beneath every headline, every public outburst, lay a truth far more unsettling. Renée Geyer had been at war with her own body, her own mind, and an industry that both celebrated and suffocated her. The first quiet bombshell came with her breast cancer diagnosis. It was a secret she guarded fiercely, even from some of her closest friends. She continued to tour, perform, and appear in public with the same swagger that had defined her since the 70s. Behind the scenes, however, she was enduring chemotherapy, fatigue, and the creeping fear that her body was no longer under her command. Still, she refused to be pitied. In her own words, "I've never wanted to be known as brave, just loud." But the loudness was beginning to crack. By the mid-2000s, years of substance abuse, chronic pain, and emotional exhaustion began to surface more openly. She admitted in interviews to decades of drug and alcohol use, often brushing it off with gallows humor. "I've probably snorted half the record industry," she once joked. The crowd laughed, but it wasn't funny. Behind the bravado was a woman self-medicating deep emotional pain. She spoke of loneliness in hotel rooms, of the weight of expectations, and of her frustration with being misunderstood. In 2010, she was once again thrust into scandal after being charged for racially abusing a receptionist in Sydney. The media pounced. For days, headlines painted her as a fallen icon, proof of her long-standing reputation for volatility. Renée issued a rare apology, but the damage was done. She was now not only battling disease and aging, but also the burden of being publicly canceled before the term even became mainstream. Some fans turned on her, others defended her fiercely. But no one remained indifferent. She had become a mirror for society's discomfort with women who didn't apologize for their rage. Then came the final act, one that no one expected and few truly understood. In late 2022, Renée underwent surgery on her hip. What should have been a straightforward operation led to devastating complications. She never recovered. In January 2023, the news broke that Renée Geyer had died. Fans were stunned. She had been performing just months earlier. The voice that had defined a generation was suddenly gone. As tributes poured in, so did a quiet reckoning. People revisited her music, her interviews, her memoirs. They began to see past the scandals and into the humanity of a woman who had lived unapologetically, even if that meant burning bridges along the way. Close friends revealed the private Renée, generous, self-deprecating, fiercely loyal, and heartbreakingly insecure. She had wanted to be loved, but not controlled. She wanted freedom, even if it meant isolation. One producer recalled her breaking down in the studio after recording a particularly painful ballad. She sat in the corner, lit a cigarette, and said, "That's the only honest thing I've done in weeks." That moment, unrecorded and unseen, said more than any tabloid ever could. In the wake of her death, fans began to share their own stories of how her songs got them through heartbreak, loss, depression. Her voice had become part of their own narratives, their own healing. And suddenly, the woman once dismissed as difficult was being remembered as something else entirely, real. Renée Geyer was never designed for the neat boxes the media tried to place her in. She was chaotic, brilliant, self-destructive, and deeply human. Her legacy is not just in her music, but in her refusal to be anything less than who she truly was, even if it cost her everything. At Aussie Uncovered, we believe Renée Geyer represents something rare and deeply misunderstood in the entertainment world, a woman who refused to bend, even when it broke her. In a country often uncomfortable with confrontation, Renée was thunder in human form, blunt, ferocious, and stunningly honest. She didn't care to play nice, and she didn't pretend to be perfect. And perhaps that was her greatest gift and her greatest curse. It's easy to focus on the headlines, the courtroom appearances, the barbed interviews, the public outbursts. They're the kind of stories that make easy headlines and viral sound bites. But we must ask, would a man in her position have been crucified the same way? Would his addictions be called rock and roll, his temper, artistic temperament, and his defiance, confidence? With Renée, those same traits were often labeled as difficult, toxic, or disgraceful. The double standard is undeniable. We also believe that Renée's artistic contributions have long been undercelebrated. Despite being one of Australia's most technically gifted vocalists, with a voice that stood tall beside global icons, she never received the full respect she deserved from the industry or the public. She was, in many ways, too much for Australia. Too soulful, too bold, too damaged, and too real. But in that rawness, in that refusal to polish herself for mass consumption, she became something more than a singer. She became a symbol for women who are loud and angry, for artists who refuse to compromise, for anyone who's ever been told they're too difficult to succeed. We don't condone the mistakes Renée made, nor do we excuse the harm she may have caused. But we also don't ignore the pain she carried, the illness she battled in silence, or the brutal honesty with which she told her truth. She was human, messy, imperfect, but undeniably brilliant. Her music wasn't just art, it was autobiography. Each note, each growl, each breath was a piece of her story. And now that she's gone, we're left not just with her songs, but with the uncomfortable question: did we ever really see her? Or were we too busy judging the diva to understand the woman? At Aussie Uncovered, we see Renée Geyer for everything she was: a musical powerhouse, a complicated soul, and a voice that dared to roar in a world that wanted her silent. And we invite you to feel what we feel, not just admiration, but understanding. What about you? Was Renée Geyer simply a troubled icon, or was she a woman who lived too truthfully for a world that couldn't handle her fire? Do you mourn her mistakes or celebrate her courage? We want to hear what you think. Some voices fade quietly. Renée Geyer's did not. It burned, raw, jagged, unforgettable. Even now, her voice haunts the airwaves like a distant echo of a woman who refused to whisper when she could scream, refused to nod when she could challenge, refused to survive quietly when she could live loudly. There was always something tragic about Renée, even at her brightest. Maybe it was the way she seemed to be chasing something just out of reach: peace, love, redemption. Or maybe it was the world that couldn't quite hold her. A soul singer in a country still learning how to embrace soul. A defiant woman in an industry built to tame women. A broken survivor in a culture addicted to perfection. Today, when you hear "It's a man's world" in her voice, not a cover but a declaration, you understand she wasn't singing someone else's truth. She was ripping open her own. Every line carried the weight of a life lived without compromise, and perhaps without refuge. That was her legacy: honesty, no matter the cost. Time has a way of softening the edges. The scandals fade, the headlines yellow, and what remains is the music, the voice, the fire, the feeling that someone somewhere once sang not to entertain but to be heard, fully and completely, if only for a moment. Some stories are never told, but now you know. And maybe, years from now, someone will stumble across her music. Not the stories, not the controversies, just the sound. And they'll wonder, who was this woman? Why does her voice feel like a wound and a balm at the same time? And in that quiet wonder, Renée Geyer will live again.